Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Let me start by giving the photograph of where we are. So the photograph of where we are is that in the last year, until between 2018 and 2019, undernourishment has increased in 10 million people. And the last 5 years in 60 million people. That means that by 2030, without COVID, we will be in 840 million people undernourished. So we were not achieving SDG 2 for sure. Not only that, if we add COVID-19, the number can increase in 2020 between 87 and 132 million people more undernourished, which is a chronic issue. That means that we are going to be very far from the SDG2. Now, if we add to that access to good food and to food all the times, we are around 2 billion people that cannot access to food, what we call severe and moderate food insecurity. And if we bring healthy diets, the concept of healthy diets, which basically is a step forward to energy sufficient diet, is a diet that has all the micronutrients plus has the diversity, then we have 3 billion people that today cannot access to a healthy diet. So 1/3 of the population in 2030. And finally, we are in an environment which is being pushed to its limits. So we have a problem, and it's a big problem. And that's why we believe we need to completely change the way we think on this. And this is not only a supply issue, it's also a demand issue, as it was mentioned by Pierluigi before. It's an issue of behavior, it's an issue of, on the demand side of consumers understanding what they eat, why they need to eat what they eat, and how careful they have to be in what they eat. And for that, they need to know the elements of what they eat. So there is a lot of work that we need to do in terms of informing better consumers, but it's also a lot of work that we need to do in changing their behavior. Because if they not eat properly and they only eat energy sufficient diets, of course, they will end on overweight, obesity, and have non-communicable diseases, diabetes, heart problems, and so on. And those today are valued in around $1.3 trillion a year, so until 2030, which is enormous. On the other hand, if we look at the supply side, we still have significant amount of losses in the supply side. Only on the losses side, which is everything before the retailer and the consumer, we're talking of, with the new data that FAO has developed, we're talking of around 14% of losses, without excluding waste, which is from the retailer to the consumer, which could be a lot more. Still, there is not a final number. UNEP is working on the indicator, that is the indicator for waste. But we are talking like more than 30% of the food is being lost or waste. And that's a big concern, no? Which combines supply issues, which combines technology of how we can store better, how we can make products more durable, but also combines an issue of consumer behavior. Now, can we do this transformation? Can we change things? And I think we can. I think there is a lot of opportunities and a lot of ways in which we can gain what we call efficiencies. Just to see and to understand and the result of COVID-19, what we observed with COVID-19, that the agricultural sector, despite of all the logistical problems, has been a resilient sector. We still have food everywhere. We still have food in all the supermarkets. Despite there were lockdowns, very few cases that really there was a scarcity, despite they had to close in developed countries meat processing plants and so on and so forth, you could find food around the world, meaning that this COVID-19 affected, of course, the logistical part, affected the mobility of food, but things were resolved and companies were able, food processors, to figure out solutions for that. So it's a resilient sector, but what else we can do to improve? One, I think we need to put a lot of emphasis on providing what is needed to reduce losses. Losses are extremely important because it's not only the amount of food that is not used, which in most of the cases, the bigger size of losses, between more than 30% only on losses, is on fruits and vegetables. So we can reduce that by bringing better techniques and better technologies to farmers so that they can produce better. There are huge gaps in technologies of storage, for example, huge gaps in drying technologies for smallholders, things that can be resolved. If you look at the literature of the last 20 years, there has not been good solutions for what the farmers are facing in terms of reducing losses. We can also increase efficiency of production. We can take advantage of improving food safety. For example, in Africa today, there is a free trade agreement around the region, within the region, the Africa agreement that they have achieved, but that only touches tariffs. The major problem is food safety issues because of non-tariff barriers. So if we are able to reduce those and to improve food safety with new technologies using blockchain, e-phyto, that could help us a lot to accelerate interregional trade. And that could increase the supply of this variety of diets that we need to reduce the cost of healthy diets without affecting the benefits of the producers, because we don't want to affect the benefits of the producers. What we want is more availability of food in the world, more diversity of food so that we can reduce the cost of healthy diets. So again, my point is that we need to look at all of this, but also we need to understand the system approach, and we need to understand that there are trade-offs to whatever we do. Our objective function is to achieve SDG 2. But achieving that objective function will affect other things. It will affect emissions, it will affect land, it will affect water, it will affect energy, it will affect biodiversity, and it will affect, of course, inequalities in land, inequalities in income. And that's something that we need to understand, we need to measure so that we can target policies to minimize those. Normally, we don't do that. Normally, we don't even have an objective function. So we try to target everything at the same time, and we forget that it's a system. And anything we target, there are trade-offs, and we have to minimize those and maximize complementarities. So I think that's the way to do. I think that there is a huge opportunity because of the huge amount of inefficiencies we have today. And I think the food system have shown that they can change, they can be flexible, they can adjust. So let's take advantage of that and make the change. Because I think if we bring the economics in full, we need to cost what are the externalities that using these materials will create. And normally we don't do that.
Exactly.
And that's the problem. And I think that's where the youth and movements and consumers can play a role. Because at the end of the line, if there are companies that are willing to take the challenge and are willing to make the difference, their problem is that they lose competitiveness because they could use materials which are more expensive. And the other companies continue to use what they are not supposed to use because of the high level of externalities. But that's where the consumer movement can change things, because if consumer movement supports those companies which are doing the effort, no matter the product becomes a little bit more expensive, they will force the other ones to change. And that's where I think the youth can play a crucial role, because that will make the difference. You are given the proper incentives for companies to do the change. And the companies which are trying to assume that, they are getting the proper incentives. And that could force the other companies to do the change. But I think it's really important to understand that it will be very difficult to really true cost the externalities and the trade-offs that these plastics and so on have in the world. But consumers can push for that. And that's where youth, I think, can play a crucial role. Like they play in anything, like they are the ones telling parents not to be careful with the produce, to sort them and so on and so forth. They are the ones. That's the change, because in so many cases, especially when we talk of developing countries, rural areas, the generations are older. We're talking of older generations. And it's not that they don't want to behave different. It's that sometimes most of them don't know how to read and write. And it's very difficult to make them change their behavior, because if they cannot understand most of the things that are happening because of the lack of education, they were not lucky to have education. But the youth can be that translator, that bridge, that translate the information that comes to them in the way that they can understand and make the change. I am completely believable that all the generations can change. In many cases, it's difficult for them because they don't necessarily understand the way we are communicating today. So I fully agree. This is not this is not only your responsibility at all. This is the responsibility of everybody. When I brought these numbers at the beginning, is because the problem is so big that we all have to play a role here. That's the only way this is going to change. And this has to be governments, policymakers, and so on. The point, I think, which is important, is to create this movement, this change, trying to create this movement of transformation and of change. We cannot accept the situation that we are living today. It's unacceptable. It's terrible. It's terrible for especially for us, all the generations which are the creators of the mess that we have today. It's terrible. So I don't think we have to push the responsibility to you. That's not the way. On the contrary, I think we are responsible, and you are helping us to different mechanisms. But the responsibility is with us. We and the older generations. I am not only responsible; there are older people also that did it. But that's what. But on the other hand, I also think that this movement In FAO, we have something called the youth committee, and the youth committee is not younger people necessarily, it's youthfulness. Okay, so we have people which are very young, but we also have people which are higher ages, which are youthful because they want to bring innovation and new ideas to change things. And that's how I see this type of movement. But what is important is let's wake up and do the change. It's so weird what we are living today. The COVID-19 is changing the lives. Like I see my kids, which are your ages or younger, they are completely choked with what is going on because they are messing their life completely. COVID-19 is complicating their life, their choices, where to work, what to do, and so on and so forth. So we are facing this enormous shock today, and people still don't open their eyes. They think that, no, it will go over. You know how much people will go into poverty with the decrease of GDP growth that we are observing? We are losing 10 to 15 years of some progress that we did in the mess that we have today. The situation we're living in is terrible, but despite that, we are not reacting and we are not creating this movement. Hey, let's now change this once and for all and do things differently. So that's where I see the role of you and the role of us. But of course, governments have to play a role. But governments will react to movements. Governments will react to pressure because they are politicians at the end of the line. And the same with companies. If companies see, look what happened in Chile with the labeling. Okay, big fight with big companies because of the new labeling mechanism. And once the consumers will start to create more pressure, and the companies have to allow the Senate to do what they were supposed to do. So again, I think everybody has to play a role, but the movement is the important thing. I agree. We have an opportunity with this summit, which is launched by the Secretary General of the UN. But for us, the summit is a starting point. So it's not the end point. It's just starting the transformation and starting to understand all these externalities, like we call them trade-offs. Because the goal is to achieve SDG 2. But to achieve SDG 2, you work with all the other SDGs.
Of course.
And you will create trade-offs with, which is so simple, but it has not been done. That's the important thing. Every SDGs look at it as a silo, no? And we don't see interrelationships within SDGs. So the change that we're trying to work on the summit is trying to understand what are the sides of those trade-offs in different dimensions: emissions, water, soil, land, biodiversity, inequality, which is a huge problem. Land inequality, but income inequality. What we are observing today in COVID-19 is how bad inequality is and how much it will exacerbate because of this type of problems. So that's what we are hoping. It's called now the People Summit because it's going to be very bottom up. They're trying to make dialogues, taking advantage of the electronic world across the board that will help to bring up ideas. But in parallel, we are also trying to make a movement, and we have been working to build up a movement that will move in parallel to the summit, which we hope once and for all will create and make people understand that if we don't change now, things won't look good, and won't look good with the others and with us. So I hope that movement will fly. It's something that we are going to be announcing soon. But I am really hopeful that it will create a big difference, because we are going through such bad times, such struggles, conflict, bombs here blowing up, fertilizers, and so on and so forth. We need to bring happiness to the people. We need to work differently and do things and create a change. Also smiling. No, we need more smiles in the world, and I think that's the importance of the movement also.
But Sarah, can I follow up with Maximo and ask a perhaps slightly difficult question, Maximo, because there was a time when FAO brought out one of the most important reports on the long shadow of livestock farming, a report that then got pretty much buried, if I can use a tendentious word, for all sorts of different reasons. The difficulty about not speaking truth to parts of the industry is that everybody goes on thinking we can just optimize the really dysfunctional bits of the food and farming system. You cannot optimize mass global factory farming. There is no optimization. And so my question to you is the FAO actually going to speak truth unto those bits of the powerful industry that FAO sometimes speaks for?
I don't know. I have 1 year and a half in FAO, and that to what competes to me, I have been speaking truth all the time, and nobody has come to my office to tell me you shouldn't do it. I don't know why. I don't know why ambassadors don't want to tell me don't do something, but I can tell you truthfully that in the 1.5 years I have here, and I have done very, very difficult things, I have not seen anybody knocking my door telling me you cannot do that. Okay, so is my blame if we are not bringing up more evidence outside? Is my mistake if we are not doing it? If you look the last SOFI, State of Food Insecurity and Nutrition in the World, we were very blunt on what we are saying.
Yeah.
We're going against many people that are looking to some things, and we are even bringing public data showing indicators that nobody wanted to show before, how things are increasing substantially in certain countries. And yes, I get calls from ambassadors complaining. We work with them, we talk to them, we offer them capacity, we offer them how to fix. But I am going to bring as much truth as I can, no matter what. I don't care, honestly. I don't have any. Look, if I leave, if there is a problem, I don't have any problem on that sense. So
okay.
So I hope I hope, and my team is really committed, and I hope we can do that. That's why I'm saying, for me, the summit is just a meeting. For me, what is important is the transformation and the movement, and that will take more than 1 year. And that's where I am in, and we are trying to do as much as we can.